All right, guys, today we're talking about Each of Us a Desert by Mark Oshiro. This is a story that stole my heart. I cannot believe it only has 400 ratings on Goodreads. So I'm going to talk to you guys about it, and hopefully some of you will be like, oh, that sounds interesting, and maybe you'll pick it up. I don't expect everyone to love this story, but I think it has an audience, and I really want them to find this book because I know the people who will love this story will love it. So, just my surface level thoughts like I do in every video. This was a 4 out of 5 stars. It's a story that made me, Angela, a person who hates Journey Quest stories. Like, that's me. I'm the big bad who doesn't really love The Lord of the Rings because all they're doing is walking for 3 books, okay? That's me. I loved this journey. I loved this whole walking across a desert thing, okay? So I'm gonna get into more of why I loved that, but just know, 4 out of 5 stars, it made me love a trope I typically don't like, and that's what I'll say. So now we'll get into the synopsis and things that I thought it did really well and maybe some things I thought could have been better, etc. If you've been here before, you know how my reviews go, and if this is your first review, welcome. Thanks for stopping by. Okay, so what is Each of Us a Desert about? Well, we have our main character, Xochi. She is from El Palme, that's where her village is, and she is the taker of stories. She has to do this as a conquista because if she does not, then pesadillas, nightmares, will come to life and wreak havoc in her village. This is something they've had to do after the god of this world, Solis, burned the world down. This was the price they had to pay. So she, ever since she was young, like 8 or so, has had to take stories, go through this horribly exhausting ritual, and she basically feels like she doesn't have her own story. What she wants is a story that's her own. And that's where our book begins. That's the synopsis. We follow Xochi as she goes through a journey of self-discovery and literal world discovery. And let's talk about the world because I love the world. I actually had a friend ask me, well, isn't this magical realism? I thought this was actually post-apocalyptic fantasy. That was all the vibes I was getting. There's nothing wrong with magical realism. I just think that sometimes people assume that Latinx authors can only write magical realism, which is very much not true, and I don't think that's what he was doing here. This is very much a post-apocalyptic world with magic. It's fantastical, and it's a soft magic system, but it's magic. And I loved this world. I loved learning with Xochi as she travels about how the world is in this post-apocalyptic state and how that's affected different communities. I loved learning about these guardian figures who are these animal creatures who can talk to humans, who are responsible for protecting the humans, but also making sure everything stays pure. I loved learning about the rarity and the different traditions of different conquistas, which are what Xochi's powers are. It's really interesting to me. It was the type of fantasy where I was excited to go on this road trip and see what there was to see next. It reminded me of like Never-Ending Story, where I would just accept whatever happened next. It didn't have to make complete sense, and I never got all the answers that I wanted per se, but I got the answers I needed from this story. And I'll also say, and maybe go into it a little bit more in depth in the future, this has one of my favorite incorporations of religion in a fantasy book like ever. Another thing I want to highlight that was a plus for me was the narrative structure and the writing. So the narrative structure is Xochi talking to Solis, which is the god. That's the entire book. So when you see you being said, you is Solis, not you. But I really liked that because I love just someone telling their story. That's one of my favorite narrative structures overall, but also because she's a story taker as a conquista, she basically, whenever she takes a story in this novel of someone we meet on the journey or someone in her village, we then get her telling this flashback, and it's very direct. She's like, always says, let me tell you a story, Solis, about blah, blah, blah. And I really liked that. I really like the infusion of the Spanish language into this work. I think consuming it as an audiobook would be really hard for people who are unfamiliar with the Spanish language because Spanish words are used pretty often. Like I said, pesadilla means nightmare. We never use the word nightmare in the book. Now, it's still an English book. It's just that certain words are used instead of the English equivalent. And that didn't bother me. I have a loose understanding of Spanish, but if that's something that would bother you with auditory retention, I would physically read this. I thought, though, that it was beautiful and a great part of the world building. And for me, as someone who just wants to see more of my own culture in the genre I love, it was everything. But let's talk about the themes, because I think if you don't resonate with the characters or the themes, I could see you not loving this story. Although like I said, the world is so cool. I don't know how you couldn't be so intrigued by the mystery and history of the world, which obviously is very subjective, but I really loved that. But the theming of self-discovery and discovering your own beliefs are very strong here. Xochi doesn't have an identity other than being a contista, and she wants to know, well, who am I? What's my story? A standard story for a young adult character, right? This is not new, groundbreaking work here, but it's still an awesome story. I still love that trope. I still love coming of age. And her physically traveling to learn this thing about herself, and the way she discovers herself and the way her companion Emilia discovers herself along the way is really quite touching. But also, she's been taught something her whole life, that Solis would come down and basically ravage the earth with another fire if she didn't do her role as being a contista, if she didn't stop the pesadillas. And then she learns that what she was taught might not be true. And so she has to come to terms with what does she believe in? Is Solis real? Is he not real? And I feel like this is a religious discussion we all have with ourselves, whether we've been raised with religion or not. And watching her go through this, her figuring out what she believes, I thought was really interesting, especially in a world where there is magic. There's obviously magic here, and something brought it into play, and it could be Solis, it could be something else. We don't really know as the reader. We're following it just like Xochi is, but it was really cool and I really liked it. And I'm not particularly religious myself, but I did go to a church where a big part of the church was, okay, we're not going to tell you how to think, but you need to come up with what you think for us just as a mental exercise. So I really enjoyed this because I feel like a lot of fantasy and some young adult fantasy, they don't focus on this theme, which is fine, but it was really cool to see it. I didn't realize how much I wanted it, because I feel a lot of times in fantasy, a god is the solution to magic, right? Like, well, we have magic, therefore there's a god. And that's fine too. I love when gods are personified in my fantasy as well. Note the Inheritance trilogy. But here, to have it be more of this personal act of discovery and understanding was really great. Now, I haven't really talked about the characters, so we should probably do that. We have two main characters. We have Zo and Emilia, and they don't start off liking each other, but they both need to get away. So they both have information the other needs, so they help each other out, and they go on this journey together. They learn about each other. You can probably predict where this is going, but I really did like the character work there. It's pretty easy to understand Zo. We're in her perspective. This is a first-person narrative. Sometimes that means it's a little exhausting because she's pretty repetitive, but that also makes sense. I remember being a very repetitive teenager in terms of what I was believing, what lyrics I was quoting. Like, she finds these poems that she loves, and I'm like, you're just like me when I find a song I like, and all I can do is write those lyrics down as like my statuses on Facebook. Which for anyone, younger than me, that's a thing we used to do. But so yes, some of that could be maybe a little exhausting. I didn't notice it in consuming the audiobook, but I feel like Zo is a very well realized teenage character in this really cool fantasy dystopia. And then Emilia just has this tragic backstory, and just getting to see her travel, I kind of wish this wasn't only first person, that we had a second point of view so I could kind of get her. But I still was very invested in her part of the journey as well. And because we get these flashbacks of these side characters we meet, everyone you meet, even if it's only for a few scenes, if they go through that ritual with Xochi, it becomes more important to you. They have their own unique stories, and it also enriches your experience of the world because everyone has a different experience with the world, and it increases your empathy and your understanding, and I really liked it. So I thought the character work was really great and that I connected to it and I cared. As I say in most reviews, I feel like character connection is the most subjective thing. I cannot predict who will and won't connect to characters. I'm always praying people like my favorite characters, but I don't know. I feel like that's the part where we put the most of ourself into the situation when we meet a new character. Now, the part that is probably the weakest in this is that plot, or lack thereof. There's really not a plot. There's definitely a climax, there's definitely tension and intrigue and mystery, but it's a journey story. I mean, Xochi starts in El Palme, she goes to this other place, and that's the story. There are goals, there are high points and low points, there are points of action. Like I said, there's tension, there's this whole discussion about what is truth and, being honest. There's a lot going on, but I wouldn't say that it's plot driven at all. A lot of it's introspective, which I really liked. But that's not typically what happens in young adult fantasy. So if you pick this up as young adult fantasy, it's going to feel slow paced. But I really, really liked it. It reminded me of stories that had slower pacing, but were still also coming of age, like Dark and Deepest Red and the Winter Night trilogy. I love both of those stories so much, and both of them are not particularly plot driven, and that's the same here. And like I said, this doesn't mean that there's not things happening, but maybe the reason I like this journey story is that there isn't this MacGuffin. We're not going to take a thing to a place to stop a thing, and there's not this whole quest arc. It's a personal quest, and I really love it. But this is for sure the point that I think will stop some people from enjoying it, and I think should stop some people from picking it up. If you really require plot in your reading experience, then yes, maybe you should skip this one. It's not very big. But man, was it beautiful, and I found myself wandering through this new world, really excited to see what was around each corner, and that doesn't happen to me as much anymore. So that's why this story kind of stole my heart, and I don't know, I can't tell you how long it's going to stick with me or if I'll reread it one day, but it's vastly underhyped. This story is so well crafted and beautiful, and I highly recommend you pick it up if anything I said made you at all curious. If you've read this story, we should talk, but if you haven't read this story, are you interested in picking it up? Do you think you will? You can always leave a mountain in the description as an emoji if you just want me to know you made it this far. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.